Orders. The collapse of Japan's oldest securities firm unsettles stock markets around the globe. South Africa's Truth Commission examines murder allegations against Winnie Mandela. And two of the Tala drug suspects released by the courts last week can't be found. Good evening, welcome to 6-1. Also on the programme this evening, British Prime Minister Tony Blair meets Ian Paisley in London amid increasing concern at Westminster over his forthcoming Downing Street talks with Gerry Adams.
Paula Yates, the partner of INXS singer Michael Hutchence, says the custody battle over her 3 children by Bob Geldof had driven Hutchence to despair. And Irish golfers Paul McGinley and Pádraig Harrington on top of the world after their storming win in South Carolina.
But first, the Japanese Prime Minister has this evening sought to reassure world financial markets after the collapse of one of Japan's biggest financial institutions, Yamaguchi Securities, which collapsed with debts of £17 billion. News of the company's closure set off a slide on European and American stock markets and raised fears of a global sell-off. But this evening, Prime Minister Hashimoto said Japan was ready to deal with the closure and to try to restore confidence in its financial systems. The collapse of Yamaguchi is the latest in a series of major business failures in Japan and comes as other Asian countries are struggling with a deepening economic crisis. Here, the Minister for Finance, Charlie McCreevy, said he could not believe there will be any major impact on the Irish economy as a result of the collapse.
The Yamaichi brokerage house has represented the stability of the mostly mighty Japanese economy of the last 30 years. But last night, the lights were burning late as Yamaichi finally confessed to almost £16 billion of losses and bankruptcy. The 100-year-old firm's debt was so huge that the directors took only an hour to decide on liquidation. The company president wept at one stage and expressed deep regret, words that have become almost a cliché on top of the failures of 2 other Japanese financial institutions this month. It wasn't a good day for President Clinton to be holding a summit with the Asian Pacific Coast leaders in Canada. Among them, Malaysia's, whose economy has been crashing for months. Mr. Clinton tried to be optimistic about a trade agreement they'd all just signed.
I am very, very pleased with the agreement which has been reached by our ministers to try to tear down tariffs and open trade in 9 different areas that covers $1.5 trillion worth of trade. This is a very important achievement for this, and I think it will go quite nicely with our efforts to discuss what we can do about the current financial issues in Asia.
The leaders golfed. Then Japan's Prime Minister Hashimoto went home claiming that Yamaichi has nothing to do with other Asian countries' currency crises. But the International Monetary Fund's lending chiefs were in South Korea. Its government wants £13 billion because, as in Japan, there have been company failures there too. The IMF will lend, but with strings attached, tough government austerity measures. That sent the stock market to a 10-year low. Ordinary South Koreans, their currency down 20% this year, are panic buying American dollars. Ireland got the Tiger Economy label from the Far East, but these days the tiger's whimpering. Andrew Shepherd, RTE News.
The collapse of Yamaichi led to a fall in European stock markets, but the drop was limited because the Japanese stock market was closed for the day. Share prices in Dublin were down just over 0.5%. However, there are continuing concerns that the collapse could have far-reaching effects on economies around the globe.
Japan's financial markets are closed for today for a public holiday, and because of this it is difficult to gauge what the full reaction to the most spectacular financial collapse in that country's history will be. Yamaichi Securities has been in business for 100 years and was one of Japan's top financial houses. Like most Japanese security companies, Yamaichi has performed poorly since the Japanese financial bubble burst at the end of the 1980s. The Nikkei index of Japanese share prices tells the story. Back in 1986, it started at around 13,000, but rose sharply to over 39,000 by the end of 1989. Then the bubble burst and Japanese share prices fell. The Nikkei index collapsed to almost 17,000 and has never really properly recovered from this level.
When the bubble eventually burst in the early 90s, we've had a number of years during which the economy has been growing very, very slowly. In fact, it could be described as a recession over that period. And the banks found that the collateral they had was worth absolutely nothing. And we got a huge level of loan default. And the whole situation managed to drag on because of the unique position that the Japanese financial system finds itself in.
Yamaichi Securities had made profits of over £1 billion in 1989, but it has deteriorated rapidly ever since. In 1991, Yamaichi began to conceal its mounting losses using a series of companies it set up offshore in the Cayman Islands, well out of the sight of Japanese financial regulators. But in recent months, several other financial failures had heightened global concerns about the health of companies like Yamaichi. Early last week it emerged that several Western banks were cutting their credit lines to Japan's fourth largest stockbroker. This morning the president of Yamaichi announced his company is to fold. The Bank of Japan, the country's central bank, has said it will provide an unlimited amount of special unsecured loans to Yamaichi to protect the stockbroker's client assets, valued in the region of 120 billion Irish pounds. But it is not clear yet if this will be enough to prevent the financial collapse spreading, and fears are rising that other Japanese financial companies may have concealed large losses in the same way as Yamaichi. Last month, Western financial experts were glued to their dealing screens, transfixed by the fear that Asia's stock market collapse would become global. This month they're at it again, worried this time that one of the world's largest economies, Japan, is on the verge of a financial meltdown. At this stage it seems clear that something is seriously amiss with the economies of Southeast Asia. Only last week one of America's most highly respected economists, Rudy Dornbush, warned that Southeast Asia is on the verge of a 1930s-style Great Depression. If that were to happen, it seems inconceivable that Western economies would not at some point feel some pain. George Lee, RTE News.